Before I start, as in the last few episodes, I've got some exciting news to share. Yes, Mother, we're still going with it, and it won't be for much longer, I swear. But this is a phenomenal event, so you need to put up with it for just a tiny while longer. Right. Mark your calendars for CrimeCon Manchester 2025, partnered by True Crime. It's set to take place on the 27th of September 2025. So CrimeCon UK is heading to Manchester for the very first time this year, and I will be there. Not that that means anything, but also there will be some of the biggest names in true crime at the ultimate true crime event. So whether you've been watching my content from the start, or maybe you've just started binging my 230 plus episodes, this is your chance to meet me in person, share your theories, and perhaps even uncover new details behind some of the stories that I cover. I'm really excited to meet up with fellow true crime fans. So come and join me and the true crime community, which is a wonderful community full of lovely people, at CrimeCon Manchester, partnered by True Crime, the expert-led true crime channel that is available across all platforms, and it is well worth dipping into. Let's make this the most unforgettable crime con yet. You won't want to miss it, because I don't want to miss it. I hope to see you there. Come visit my stand and get some freebies. Now on with the episode. For decades, a shadow hung over Claremont, a suburb of Perth in Australia. In 1996 and 1997, three women who had been to nighttime establishments in Claremont ended up violently killed. And in the 2 decades it took for the crime to be solved, a climate of fear spread across the suburb and beyond. Today I look at the story of what happened and how the killer was eventually caught. This is the story of the Claremont Phantom, and this is Murder of Crows. Claremont is a western suburb of Perth, Western Australia, on the north bank of the Swan River. Prior to European settlement, the Noongar people used the area as a source of water for fishing and for catching waterfowl. In 1830, John Butler, a settler, set up an inn at Freshwater Bay, in modern-day Peppermint Grove, to attract travellers on the road from Perth to Fremantle. A wetland became known as Butler's Swamp. Well, that's very becoming, isn't it? But later known as Lake Claremont. After the arrival of convicts in the colony in 1850, work began on constructing the Fremantle Road. The government allocated land on the foreshore and at Butler's Swamp to 19 pensioner guards and their families, and a permanent convict depot operated at Freshwater Bay up until 1875. A state school and church were built in 1862, and a community gradually developed around what is now Victoria Avenue. A settler named James Morrison acquired property at Swan Location 702 and named it Claremont Estate after his wife, Clara. During the 1870s, several prominent families, including the Triggs, Sandovers and Stirlings, acquired land in the district near the future site of Christ Church Grammar School, with some of their homes later purchased and used by the school. In 1881, the railway line from Perth to Fremantle was built, along with a station at Butler's Swamp. The name of the station was changed to Claremont in 1883. The focus of the community shifted to the area between the railway line, Fremantle Road, or Stirling Highway, and Bayview Terrace. The Freshwater Bay School ceased to play a central role and eventually became a boarding house nicknamed Appy Home in 1892, and eventually in 1975 became a museum. Land speculators purchased property in the area and subdivided blocks into varying sizes, resulting in a wide class diversity within the suburb. By around 1903, the entire suburb, except for a dozen or so streets, had been subdivided. And by the time of the Second World War, the community was firmly established. It is two of this suburb's night spots in more modern times that concern our story today. In the mid-1990s, Claremont had two particular late bars that seemed to be central to the tragic events we are going to discuss today. The Continental Hotel, now known as the Claremont Hotel, and Club Bayview. The reasons for focusing on these two locations within the suburb will become horrifyingly apparent as we look at what happened to three young ladies on different nights out between 1996 and 1997. The story begins with the disappearance of Sarah Spears, who was 18 at the time, on the 27th of January 1996, after she left Club Bayview in the centre of Claremont at around 2 a.m. At 2:06 a.m., Spears called Swan taxis from a public telephone booth. Although she was living in South Perth with her older sister at the time, she had requested to be taken to the nearby suburb of Mosman Park. She was then sighted waiting alone near the corner of Stirling Road and Stirling Highway by 3 eyewitnesses, who also mentioned seeing an unidentified car stopping where she was waiting. She was not at the site when the responding taxi arrived at 2:09 a.m. Her disappearance soon attracted massive publicity, and her fate actually remains largely unknown to this day, as her body has never been found. In the early hours of Sunday, the 9th of June 1996, Jane Rimmer, who was 23 years old, from Shenton Park, also disappeared from the same part of Claremont. Similar to Spears, she had been out socializing with friends the night before. Rimmer's friends explained how they had moved from the Ocean Beach Hotel to the Continental Hotel and then to Club Bayview. Noting the long line at the club, her friends decided to call it a night and called a taxi home, but Jane opted to stay, and she was last seen on security footage waiting outside the Continental at 12:04 a.m. 55 days later, on Saturday the 3rd of August 1996, her naked body was found 40 kilometers or 25 miles south in bushland near Wellard by a family picking wildflowers. Makes a change from a dog walker, I suppose. 9 months later, in the early hours of Saturday the 15th of March 1997, Ciara Glennon, aged 27, a lawyer from Mosman Park, also disappeared from the Claremont area. Like the others, she was with friends at the Continental and had decided to make her own way home. 3 men at a bus stop saw Glennon walking south along Stirling Highway at approximately 12:30 a.m. and observed her interacting with an unidentified light-coloured vehicle which had stopped near to her. 19 days later, on the 3rd of April, her semi-clothed body was found by a bushwalker some 40 kilometers or 25 miles north, near a track in scrub off Pippidinny Road in Eglinton. The police soon linked the disappearances and murders due to similarities between them, and fear spread throughout Claremont and beyond after the likelihood of a serial offender in that area. The fear was palpable, and pressure was put on the authorities to trace and arrest the perpetrator. Within 48 hours of the initial disappearance of Spears, the case was taken over by the Major Crimes Squad. And then after the disappearance of Rimmer, the Western Australia Police set up a special task force called Macro to investigate the two similar cases. Macro was headed at first by Paul Ferguson and then later by David Capehorn. After the disappearance of Glennon, police confirmed that they were searching for a serial killer, and the Western Australian government offered a $250,000 reward, the largest ever offered in the state at the time. Initial inquiries centered on the unidentified vehicles seen at two of the locations and on an unidentified man seen in the video footage. Suspicion then focused on Perth's taxi drivers, because the women were last seen in circumstances where they may have used taxis. This included a driver who claimed to have transported spears the night before her disappearance. A massive fingerprint and DNA testing exercise was then carried out on the thousands of taxi drivers licensed within Western Australia. Given evidence of a number of unlicensed operators, examining standards for eligibility were raised, and 78 drivers with significant criminal history were de-licensed. Stricter standards were also applied to verifying that decommissioned taxis were stripped of insignia and equipment. In December 2015, investigators finally revealed that fibres taken from Rimmer were identified as coming from a Holden Commodore VS Series 1, one of the cars that had been seen that night. Macro, as a task force, attracted both praise and criticism for its handling of the case. At its peak, it had over 100 members across 10 different teams. To avoid leaks, strict confidentiality protocols were implemented, and details of the nature of the deaths and injuries were suppressed. One of the tactics used by Macro was the controversial distribution of questionnaires to 110 persons of interest, including various confrontational inquiries such as, "Are you the killer?" Oh, let me just tick the box saying yes. Another was its reliance on international experts and use of an imported lie detector machine. Indeed, one of its officers accepted an offer by David Burney to assist the investigation. Burney was a cockwomble and a member of a killer couple that I've covered on this channel previously. The task force was also censured for its overly narrow focus. Over its lifetime, Macro had 11 separate police reviews, including one in August 2004 led by Paul Schramm, who was the officer who had led the Snowtown investigation. I will be covering Snowtown at some point. Macro was finally wound down in September 2005 and the investigation was moved to the Special Crimes Squad. The police response was largely considered a failure, and even in some circles completely bungled. It was claimed that the Western Australia Police Force botched the investigation so badly that it became its own scandal, with several key issues highlighted that critics levelled at the police, including that crucial leads were ignored, DNA wasn't properly analysed for years, victims' families were left in the dark, and potshot theories were brought in, ranging from taxi drivers to lone backpackers. By the time the police had pulled their heads out of the sand, the trail had gone completely cold. And it seems for much of that time the police were focused on just one man. In April 1998, a public servant from Cottesloe, Lance Williams, who was 41 years old at this time, he was identified by the police as the prime suspect after his behaviour attracted their attention, including driving around after midnight and circling the Claremont area up to 30 times, and this had come to their attention during a decoy operation. Subjected to a high level of surveillance and police pressure over several years, Williams maintained his innocence. After interviewing him 6 times at length, police declared in late 2008 that he was no longer a person of interest. Williams would later die in 2018. It was reported that police also investigated whether backpacker murderer Bradley Murdoch may have been involved. Although Murdoch was serving a custodial sentence from November 1995 until February 1997. In October 2006, it was also announced that British murderer Mark Dixie was a prime suspect in the killings, and that Macro had requested DNA samples. However, Western Australia Police Deputy Commissioner Murray Lampard was later quoted as saying, "Dixie was closely investigated at the time and eventually ruled out as a suspect." So it very much looked like, in the absence of any viable leads, rather than trawling through for small details that may have been missed and could have provided the key to the case, the police were firing fantastical theories in the hope that something stuck. It just made the ongoing and dragging investigation seem all the more rudderless and chaotic. But finally, after 20 years, there was a breakthrough after modern DNA analysis. On the 22nd of December 2016, Bradley Robert Edwards was arrested at his Kewdale house in relation to the deaths of both Jane and Kiara. The next day, he was charged with both murders. According to ABC News, he was believed to have had no previous link to the case, though he had pleaded guilty to the aggravated assault of a social worker at Hollywood Private Hospital on the 7th of May 1990. He was also charged in relation to 2 other attacks: the house break and enter and unlawful detention of an 18-year-old woman in Huntingdale on the 15th of February 1988. In this case, a stolen kimono with his DNA was dropped as the attacker fled. And the unlawful detention and 2 counts of aggravated sexual penetration without consent of a 17-year-old girl in Claremont on the 12th of February 1995. On the 22nd of February 2018, Edwards was also charged with the willful murder of the first victim, Sarah Spears, even though her body had never been found. In all, Edwards was charged with 8 offences. And on the 21st of October 2019, Edwards pleaded guilty to the 5 non-murder charges at Huntingdale and at Karrakatta Cemetery.
The Claremont serial killings have haunted Perth for over 20 years.
Every parent's nightmare.
Really quite terrifying.
Vanished from the same area.
Australia's longest running police investigation.
We certainly have fears that there is a serial killer at loose in Perth.
Sarah Spears was the first young woman to disappear. It was Australia Day, 1996. The 18-year-old had been celebrating at Club Bayview in Claremont, a wealthy Perth suburb. Just after 2 a.m, she booked a taxi from a nearby phone booth. But when the cab arrived, just a few minutes later, she'd gone.
I must admit that as the hours go by, I get more and more concerned, yes.
Sarah Spears has been missing ever since. 4 months later, 23-year-old Jane Rimmer disappeared from the Continental Hotel, just around the corner from Club Bayview. This security vision shows her standing outside, in the bottom left-hand corner by a pole. Soon after, she vanishes. Police now believe there's a connection between the 2 disappearances, setting up the Macro Task Force, a murder inquiry that would go on to investigate over 3,000 people and become Australia's longest and most expensive manhunt.
Good morning, Crime Stoppers. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Jane Rimmer's body was discovered 8 weeks later in bushland south of Perth.
No, the body had not been buried. There had been an attempt to conceal the body, but it was in dense bush.
The following year, a third woman, Kira Glennon, goes missing after visiting the same hotel. She'd only just flown home to Perth from overseas to attend her sister's wedding. She left the hotel just after midnight and was last spotted on nearby Stirling Highway.
We're presuming that her intentions were to catch a cab and go home.
Less than a month later, Ms Glennon's body is found in bushland north of Perth.
Preliminary investigation at the scene reveals the body to be that of a female, and it appears to be that of Kira Glennon.
The city's 5,500 taxi drivers were in the frame, urged to provide saliva samples and fingerprints.
I think it's absolutely foolish to catch a cab home by yourself if you're a female.
But then police honed in on one particular man, Lance Williams.
For the past 12 months, Perth police have followed this man 24 hours a day.
A civil servant seen driving around Claremont at night, offering women lifts home.
Are you the serial killer?
No.
Are you innocent?
Yes.
The 41-year-old suspect continues to be a key focus of the investigation.
Mr Williams and his elderly parents endured constant police surveillance for more than 2 years. He was never charged and eventually dismissed as a person of interest. but his name will forever be linked to the killings. Mr Williams died in 2018. Police were heavily criticised for their focus on one suspect. The macro investigation's lack of results led to multiple reviews. It was almost disbanded. Then, 20 years after the first victim went missing, an arrest.
The West Australia Police has made a significant breakthrough in this long-running case.
48-year-old former Telstra worker Bradley Robert Edwards has been charged with the murders of Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer and Kira Glennon. He denies the charges. He has admitted to raping a 17-year-old girl at Karrakatta Cemetery in 1995 and attacking another woman in her home 7 years earlier.
Before the trial, the prosecution applied for Edwards to be tried by a judge alone, without a jury. The application was granted due to the publicity surrounding the case and the graphic nature of the evidence. The murder trial began on the 25th of November 2019 before Supreme Court Justice Stephen Hall. During the trial, the court was told that two of the victims had defensive wounds. Edward's DNA was also found under Glennon's fingernails, although the defense argued that this evidence was contaminated in the laboratory. I don't suppose they had much else to hang their hats on. One of the main pieces of evidence was the Telstra work vehicle. Edwards was working as a Telstra technician at the time, and it was claimed that he used company vehicles after hours to execute his crimes. This was corroborated by a witness, a security guard who recalled seeing a Telstra van parked on multiple occasions at the Karrakatta Cemetery for no apparent reason, both after the 1995 attack and before Spears' 1996 disappearance. According to the prosecutor, between 1995 and 1997, a man with a Telstra station wagon stopped to look at women and offer them rides. The vehicle had distinctive teardrop hubcaps, which were present on some Series 1 VS Commodores. Between April 1996 and December 1998, Edwards drove a white VS series wagon with Telstra logos. The vehicle was tracked down and impounded on the same day as his arrest. During the hearing, it was revealed that fibres matching carpet in the rear of Edwards' vehicle matched fibres found on the bodies of both Rimmer and Glennon, although the defence argued these fibres could have come from another source or another vehicle which was not included in the Western Australian crime database. But as I said, the defence were really fighting an uphill battle, so they were just trying to break down anything the prosecution had to say. The trial concluded on the 25th of June 2020 after 7 months of hearings and evidence from more than 200 witnesses. Justice Hall then retired to consider his verdict in the case. On the 23rd of September 2020, Hall handed down a 619-page written verdict, within which Edwards was found guilty of the murders of Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon, but not of Sarah Spears. But that was through lack of evidence and lack of a body, though it was more likely that Edwards was involved in her disappearance than not.
It's a trial like no other because of the combination of its length, its size, and the high degree of public interest. The events in question occurred more than 20 years ago, but have haunted the memory of many people and troubled the public conscience. The disappearance and likely murder of 3 young women was in itself enough to cause wide concern. The fact that all 3 went missing from a popular nightlife area frequented by many young people inspired a real and pervasive sense of fear. Whilst courts are almost always open to the public, this is often little more than a platitude. In this case, attendance during the trial was strong and sustained. Further publicity, both before and during the trial, was significant. Multiple reporters from various media outlets attended every day. Few trials have been so consistently reported or reported on in such detail. The accused, Bradley Robert Edwards, is charged with willfully murdering Sarah Spears, Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon. In order to be guilty of such a charge, it must be proven beyond reasonable doubt that the accused killed the named person, that the killing was unlawful, and that the accused intended to cause death. Sarah Spears was last seen in Claremont in the early hours of the morning of 27 January 1996. She was an 18-year-old secretary. She has never been seen again, and there has been nothing to indicate that she is still alive. Though her body has never been found, the only reasonable conclusion is that she is dead. Jane Rimmer was last seen in Claremont just after midnight on the 9th of June 1996. She was aged 23 years old and was employed as a childcare worker. Her body was located in Wellard on the 3rd of August 1996. Ciara Glennon was last seen in Claremont just after midnight on the 15th of March 1997. She was aged 27 years old and was employed as a solicitor. Her body was located in Eglinton on the 3rd of April 1997. I'm satisfied that the evidence establishes that each of the victims was abducted and killed. The real question is the identity of the killer or killers. In particular, the question in respect of each count is whether it has been proven beyond reasonable doubt that the accused is the killer. The evidence of identity is circumstantial evidence, and in particular, forensic evidence relating to DNA and fibres. In order to prove the guilt of the accused, that evidence must be capable not only of supporting an inference that the accused was the killer in each case, but also of excluding any reasonable possibility that anyone other than the accused could have been the killer. That evidence is strongest in respect of the killing of Ciara Glennon. There is also some forensic evidence in respect of the identity of the killer of Jane Rimmer. However, in the case of Sarah Spears, there is no forensic evidence at all. There are 2 suggested courses of reasoning in respect of each charge. In respect of Miss Glennon and Miss Rimmer, the first course of reasoning is to determine whether similarities between their cases justify a conclusion that they were killed by the same person. And if that conclusion is reached, to then rely on evidence from both cases to determine the identity of that killer. The second course of reasoning is to look at Miss Glennon's case first, and if the identity of her killer is proven, to then use that as propensity evidence in respect of the other charges. This course of reasoning would then turn to the case of Miss Rimmer to determine whether the evidence in that case, together with the propensity evidence, establishes the identity of her killer. In respect of Miss Spears, the first course of reasoning is to determine whether similarities between her case and that of the other 2 justifies a conclusion that they were killed by the same person, and to then rely on evidence from all 3 cases to determine the identity of that killer. Having regard to the DNA evidence, the fibre evidence and the propensity evidence, I'm satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that the accused was the killer of Miss Glennon. The circumstances of the abduction and nature of the wounds inflicted proves beyond reasonable doubt that he intended to kill Miss Glennon. Miss Rimmer was last seen in Claremont in the early hours of the 9th of June 1996. Miss Rimmer was killed by a person wielding a sharp instrument and inflicting a fatal injury or injuries to the neck. The fibre evidence establishes that Miss Rimmer was in a VS Holden Commodore station wagon that was habitually driven by a Telstra employee in the time shortly before her death. I'm also satisfied that the accused drove such a vehicle at the relevant time. The propensity evidence of the Karrakatta incident establishes that the accused had a tendency to violently attack and abduct young women from the Claremont area, and the additional propensity evidence of the killing of Miss Glennon establishes that tendency developed to killing an abducted young woman using a sharp instrument and disposing of her body in a semi-rural location. Having regard to the fibre evidence and the propensity evidence, including that relating to the killing of Miss Glennon, I'm satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that the accused was the killer of Miss Rimmer. The circumstances of the abduction and the nature of the wounds inflicted proves beyond reasonable doubt that the accused intended to kill Miss Rimmer. In respect of Miss Spears, I've reached the following conclusions as to the first course of reasoning. 1. There are some similarities between the circumstances of Miss Spears' disappearance and the death of that of Miss Rimmer and Miss Glennon. Those similarities are A, that Miss Spears, Miss Rimmer and Miss Glennon were all young women, B, that all attended venues in the Claremont area to socialise with friends and were last seen in that area before leaving on their own, C, that all went missing in the early hours of a weekend morning, D, that all went missing within a 14-month period from January 1996 to March 1997, and E, that they were all abducted and killed. Those similarities are of a more general nature and are far fewer than those that exist as between Miss Rimmer and Miss Glennon. They do not allow for a conclusion to be reached beyond reasonable doubt that the person who killed Miss Rimmer and Miss Glennon must necessarily be the same person as killed Miss Spears. A possibility, or even a probability in that regard, is not enough to support a conclusion beyond reasonable doubt. Accordingly, on the first course of reasoning, evidence as to the identity of the killer of Miss Rimmer and Miss Glennon cannot assist in identifying the killer of Miss Spears. Based on those findings, the verdicts will be as follows. Stand up, please, Mr. Edwards. On count 6, that on or about the 27th of January 1996 at Claremont and elsewhere, you willfully murdered Sarah Ellen Spears. My verdict is that you are not guilty. On count 7, that on or about the 9th of June 1996 at Claremont and elsewhere, you willfully murdered Jane Louise Rimmer. My verdict is that you are guilty. On count 8, that on or about the 15th of March 1997 at Claremont and elsewhere, you willfully murdered Kira Eilish Glennon. My verdict is that you are guilty. You can sit down.
On the 23rd of December 2020, Edwards was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Hall said that there was a high likelihood that Edwards would die in prison. Over the years, other cases have been linked to the Claremont killer. In April of 2008, journalist Liam Bartlett reported that police told the father of a fourth missing woman, 22-year-old Julie Cutler, that his daughter was probably a victim of the Claremont killer. Cutler, a university student from Fremantle, vanished after leaving a staff function at the Parmelia Hilton Hotel in Perth on 9 p.m. on the 20th of June 1988. Her car was found in the surf near to Cottesloe Beach 2 days later, and her fate remains unknown. Other possible cases include that of Lisa Brown, aged 19, who was a sex worker that disappeared on the 10th of November 1998. And Sarah McMahon, aged 20, who disappeared on the 8th of November 2000.
Since the Claremont serial killings, and the body of Sarah Spiers still hasn't been found. But now a potential new witness has come forward who believes he knows the 18-year-old's final resting place.
The night Sarah Spiers vanished from Claremont in January 1996 was the beginning of one of the darkest chapters in WA's history.
The period, where Sarah Spiers disappeared was a really frightening time around here.
The 18-year-old's body has never been found, but now there's been a breakthrough clue which could lead police to her final resting place. Veteran journalist Brett Christian was recently contacted by an anonymous horse rider who says he saw something suspicious in the Darling Ranges the very morning Sarah went missing.
He looked over towards a Telstra hut and there was a Telstra vehicle, a white station wagon, parked near it. And there was a man coming out of the bush carrying a long-handled trenching shovel.
In 2020, former Telstra technician Bradley Robert Edwards was found guilty of murdering Claremont victims Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon. But without a body, there was no physical evidence linking him to Sarah's disappearance. After seeing Edwards convicted, the new witness...
he was convinced that the man he saw was Bradley Edwards.
Journalist Brett Christian believes this could be the tip-off police have been waiting 26 years for. Officers say they are aware of the claims but wouldn't confirm if they're investigating further. Jane Rimmer's body was found in Wellard, around 40 minutes south of Perth. Ciara Glennon's around 40 minutes north. The Eastern Darling Scarp site...
It's roughly halfway between where the two other bodies were found.
If the area is Sarah Spiers' final resting place, only time will tell.
I'll be riveted to see what happens.
Steph Baumgartel for 10 News First.
And that was the drawn-out and convoluted case of the Claremont Phantom. A case noted as much for the nature of the investigation and the methods and theories of the police, as for the cruel, abhorrent crimes of Bradley Edwards. As soon as the term serial killer was released by the police, the scrutiny on the investigation and the level of media interest was huge. And whether it was this external pressure or poor leadership and direction of the investigation, there were unquestionably errors of judgment and a clear lack of focus to the investigation. Despite this, and while the police did eventually get their man, it is easy to forget that at least 3 innocent women were killed, and numerous others assaulted by this cockwomble, who remained at liberty for almost 20 years longer than he should have been. While people continue to pore over the investigation to poke holes and try to learn lessons, we also need to remember the victims who simply crossed paths with a dangerous predator. These young women never got to live the lives they should have. And I send love and condolences to all of those touched by the evil of this creature who is finally languishing in prison where he belongs. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. Don't forget that CrimeCon UK will be coming to Manchester in September, and there is still time to get involved with one of the UK's finest true crime events. And if you use my code CROWS, you can get 10% off tickets. And if you're there, come and find me on my stand and grab some freebies. But with that said, I'm Steve. Samson has gone off in a diva huff, so in his absence I will just say, I'm Steve, and I'll see you when I see you.